Perhaps you're familiar with one of the most important battles of the Revolutionary War, when Washington attacked Trenton, New Jersey on Christmas Eve, 1776. Now, what you probably know about that battle comes from this famous painting, which portrays Washington and his troops crossing over the icy Delaware on that fateful evening. Now, this dramatization, it's emblazoned upon our mind as the embodiment of how we defeated the British. But what you may not know is what actually happened on that icy Christmas Eve. So things had not been going well for the Revolutionary Army. Under Washington's leadership, they had lost New York City and other strategic points in the region. And as winter began to set in, the troops, they were run down, hungry, and dejected. Washington needed a win, so he had been meticulously planning this attack on the Hessian troops who had been aiding the British. He decided he wanted to attack on Christmas Eve because it would be unexpected. According to normal military decorum, there was a gentleman's agreement that you did not attack on a religious holiday. And so Washington thought, well, this is the perfect opportunity because it will catch them off guard. So Washington and his troops, they start marching toward the rendezvous point, but immediately the weather begins to deteriorate. The temperature drops, it begins to snow, and before they know it, they're 3 hours behind. And when they get to the rendezvous point, they look into the Delaware and it's full of ice, so even crossing over is going to be a real problem for them. On top of this, what Washington didn't know is that 2 of his men had defected and told the Hessians that he was coming. So Washington was walking into a death trap. Surveying the situation, realizing the odds were stacked against him, he decided to take the risk of his men possibly being captured, and they would have been had it not been for a little stroke of luck on his part. So Colonel Rahl, who was in charge of the Hessian troops, he was waiting for Washington to arrive. But as the weather deteriorated, he thought to himself, no general in his right mind would try to attack under these conditions. And he's right. No general in his right mind would. But Washington wasn't in his right mind. He was desperate. So Colonel Rahl, he tells his troops that they're allowed to go celebrate Christmas. So they go back in their tents, they bundle up because they're freezing, and they start drinking copious amounts of alcohol. Now, the fact that Washington was 3 hours late to the rendezvous point, this served him well because by the time he actually got over to Trenton and invaded the camp, most of the Hessians were passed out drunk in their tents, so it made them easy targets. In the end, the Revolutionary Army only lost 4 soldiers and they captured 1,000 Hessians. Now, from a strategic standpoint, this win meant very little, but it achieved 2 things. First, it was a huge morale booster for the colonists and the Revolutionary Army. And 2, it taught Washington something very important, that if he was going to be able to be successful against the British, he was going to have to use surprise attacks and unconventional tactics, which he did throughout the rest of the war, and it's the reason why they won. Now, Washington was taking a huge risk by crossing over the Delaware that evening. I would say it's one of the biggest risks a leader of a country has ever taken. Had he gone over and the weather hadn't been as bad as it was, and had the Hessians been waiting, likely he would have been captured along with his troops, and that likely would have changed the outcome of the Revolutionary War and the trajectory of our country. Of course, we all love it when people take big risks and those risks pay off. But what happens when someone takes a risk and it doesn't pay off? What happens when you put yourself out there and things don't turn out the way you'd hoped? The fact is, we all take risks in our lives. The question is, when is the risk worth the reward? And when should we maybe step back from that gamble? To begin, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine who has taken a lot of risks in his life. Will you join me in the kitchen?